Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime as Liverpool finally return to European action after a 7-month absence from the competition. Of course, after we got booted out by Atletico Madrid in the round of 16 way back in March, the last time any of us were allowed in a football ground. And then, of course, everything that has happened since then. And I think it's fair to say that plenty of things have occurred since the last time Liverpool took to the stage in the Champions League. It is, of course, absolutely fantastic to be back in a competition that I think most of us feel most at home in as Liverpool fans. Of course, it was fantastic to win the Premier League last season, but this really feels like the competition where Liverpool come into their own. It felt like the place where we really found our identity under Jurgen Klopp and, of course, got our first trophy under his stewardship as manager. And, of course, with everything that's going on at the moment, not just the pandemic and, of course, all the games being played behind closed doors, but, of course, recent events as well that have transpired over the last week or so, it really feels great to be back in a competition where you feel like Liverpool can get out there, make a statement, and not necessarily get themselves back on the right track, because I'm not saying that our season has been derailed, but it certainly feels like it's in danger of spiraling into something that's more out of control than maybe it was last season, where, you know, we were just winning the Premier League at a canter, picking up 3 points every week, and it just felt like the good times were going to last forever, and this Liverpool team were perfect and could never ever be beaten. Of course, I am going to start pretty much straight away with the team news, because that very much informs the narrative going into this game. It's something that Jurgen Klopp seemed a little bit sick of talking about during his press conference last night. You know, it seemed every single question was about injuries to players and who wasn't available. It seemed no one actually wanted to talk about the game against Ajax, and of course he's very much a game-by-game manager. All he cares about at the moment is exactly how Liverpool can beat Ajax, and we will be without several of our, you know, first team stars for this game. Of course, the biggest absence of them all is Virgil van Dijk, who's going to be out for a while. I think it's fair to say, you know, we'd be very fortunate if he returns between now and the end of the season. Of course, it's all up in the air. It remains to be seen how his surgery goes, and that could go well and the prognosis could be reduced. It could go badly and we could be looking at maybe up to 12 months out of the team for Virgil van Dijk. But in the meantime, he's certainly not going to be playing in this game against Ajax. Another player who's not going to be available is Thiago. He also picked up an injury from an absolutely shocking challenge from an Everton player on Saturday. Thankfully, it doesn't look like it's going to be a long-term layoff for him. We haven't really been given much of a prognosis, but Jurgen Klopp seemed to suggest, and other figures around the club seem to suggest, that while he is definitely out of this Ajax game, we shouldn't necessarily worry too much about long-term, because we might see him back sooner rather than later. Another player who's not available is Joel Matip, who, of course, with the injury to Virgil van Dijk, very much looked like he was going to become a key player for Liverpool, and it still looks like he will be over the next few weeks. It's very much a precaution, the reason he's been taken out of the side for this one. He picked up a little bit of a knock in the game against Everton, and it was kind of established that, given that was his first game back from injury and he did play the full 90 minutes, I think if what happened to Virgil van Dijk didn't happen, then maybe Joel Matip only plays about 70 minutes of that game. But, you know, that's all in the past now, and Joel Matip did have to play 90 minutes, and it was a very, very intense match as well. And of course, with him just coming back from injury, it's kind of understandable that he probably wouldn't have played this game under any circumstances. You know, even if Virgil van Dijk hadn't been injured, you feel like Joel Matip would definitely have dropped out of this one, and it probably would have been Van Dijk and Gomez. So we're not going to risk him for that. We are going to... He went for a scan after the game, and it sounds like there's nothing serious, nothing we have to worry about long term, and hopefully he'll be back for the Saturday match against Sheffield United. And with that in mind, I think he's been taken out of the squad as a simple precaution. So there'll be no Joel Matip for the game against Ajax, but hopefully nothing to worry about there over the next few weeks. Alisson Becker has also returned to training, which, of course, given all the bad news we've had with injuries, is absolutely fantastic to hear. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like he's going to be ready for this game. He's kind of training on his own at the moment, doing a lot of falling and diving practice, apparently, basically just getting himself back into the rhythm. It was a shoulder injury, so they've basically got to keep going day by day and testing whether or not it's able to withstand impacts and strain and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll see him before the end of it, before the international break that's coming up in a few weeks' time. It is starting to look like, you know, he's going to come back sooner rather than later, but I don't think he's going to be playing in this game. There certainly hasn't been any word to suggest that he would. So in terms of the match itself, it's probably our toughest game of the Champions League group stage. Of course, to repack, we've been recap even, not repack. We've been drawn against Ajax from pot 2, Atalanta from pot 3 and Midtjylland from pot 4. And while Atalanta were one of the surprise packages of the Champions League last time out, they performed very, very well, and I believe they got to the quarterfinals before being knocked out in quite harsh circumstances with a late turnaround against PSG. It looked for all the world like they were going to make the semi-finals, and they looked like a fantastic team. They looked like a team that could have potentially gone all the way, and it was so unlucky that they got knocked out. But I think Ajax are probably the best side in the group aside from Liverpool, if we're being honest. And of course, away from home as well, that makes this tie just a little bit tougher. While Ajax, of course, don't have the fans and everything like that, there is still the effect that the travel is going to have on the players, the fact that they have to make those flights in, the fact they're going to be training in sort of uncertain circumstances. They don't really know the area. They're going to be staying in hotels they've never stayed in before and stuff like that. And that can have a little bit of a psychological effect still on the players. You certainly still feel like, even without the crowd at Anfield, playing at home is a little bit of a boost for Liverpool in comparison to playing away. So it's a very, very tough game, and it's come at a very, very tough time for Liverpool. Probably the toughest time we've faced for quite a few years now. You know, you look back at the last couple of seasons, and while there've been plenty of highs and lows and moments where we felt crushed and moments where we felt elated, you've always felt like Liverpool were in a strong position. You always felt like they were in a position to compete at the very highest level. It's hard to look back and find a time in recent years under Jurgen Klopp where Liverpool have been as under the cosh and up against it as they are at the moment. So it's so important that leadership shines through in this game. That's something that's been so critical to this Liverpool team over the last few years, is that they are a team of leaders. You haven't just got like a captain and a vice captain on the pitch. You've got people all around in different areas, in key areas, who are capable of taking games by the scruff of the neck, managing games, taking responsibility both for their actions and their teammates as well. And of course, Virgil van Dijk was absolutely imperative to that. He was one of the big leaders on the pitch. He was a huge personality, both on the pitch and in the dressing room as well. I'm sure, you know, during halftime breaks and before games and stuff like that in the dressing room, he was one of the players who was psyching everyone up, who was talking to people, who was getting them ready for the game, getting them in the right headspace. So he will be a massive miss. But like I said, we're a team of leaders, and so it's up to other players to step up now. It's up to people like Joe Gomez to step up to the plate, and it's not assume the role of Van Dijk, because he can't just go out and think, I'll go and do everything that Virgil does, but assume the kind of stature on the pitch that Virgil van Dijk had in terms of managing the game, managing the team, and doing Jurgen Klopp's job on the pitch for him, essentially. And of course, like I said, it's a very tough game. We're going to need everything we've got, and in a way, it might actually work in our favour. If Liverpool can come away with a positive result, then all these narratives about their season potentially falling apart, about the fact that they're probably not favourites for the title anymore because of the lack of Virgil van Dijk, those narratives will start to quieten down if Liverpool can get a big statement result. Just look at Manchester United last night, a team that are in not necessarily turmoil, but certainly not where they'd want to be. They've got so many problems and so more questions than answers around their team and their backroom staff, and all the way up to the top of the hierarchy of the club at the moment. But beating PSG 2-1 in their own backyard just buys you a little bit of time. It brings up your status. It sends out a statement that maybe things aren't as bad as people have presumed, and Liverpool have got a great opportunity to do that by playing up against a European giant. I think it's fair to say, obviously, Ajax aren't the team that they maybe have been in the past. They've been a little bit resurgent recently, but going away to Amsterdam and getting a result that would, of course, kick off a Champions League group stage campaign with a win would be a huge moment for Liverpool in a season that is in danger of spiralling out of control a little bit, I think it's fair to say, if things don't go our way over the next few games. So as for how I think Liverpool are actually going to line up at the Amsterdam Arena, I think it is probably going to be Adrian San Miguel in goal. Again, there have been shouts for Marcelo Pitaluga, the 17-year-old goalkeeper that we signed, who has, of course, been training with the first team. There's always the outside shout of Kevin Kelleher as well. And, of course, with Alisson absent, although albeit not maybe for as long as we thought he was going to be, and who knows, with it before the international break, when we've got more Champions League games, of course, we play next week and the week after that, we might actually be seeing him back in Champions League action within a few weeks. But in the meantime, this looks like it could be an opportunity to test out more than one goalkeeper. You know, you can go with having a Premier League goalkeeper and a European Cup goalkeeper, and it looks less uncertain than if you were to, say, just chop and change in Premier League games. You know, if we start throwing Adrian in one week and Kelleher in another week in Premier League matches, it looks like we have no idea who our best backup goalkeeper is. But if you change it between competitions, it kind of looks like you're actually just trying to get the lads in competition with one another. So there's maybe an opportunity there, and of course there is the idea idea that maybe European football is slightly different. You don't come under the same physical pressure from crosses and high balls into the box and stuff like that you maybe would in the Premier League. It's of course different opposition as well in terms of standard. You maybe expect Ajax to have a few more shots and chances against Liverpool than maybe Sheffield United on Saturday evening, for example. So there's a possibility there to rotate goalkeepers, and personally, I'd quite like to see it because, as I've said on pre-match videos already on this channel, it's been done to death a little bit by now. I'm not convinced by Adrian, and I think if we've got these other two lads, Kelleher and Pitaluga, available as backup goalkeepers, and Adrian's not performing on a several game basis, then you might as well use them. So personally, I'd like to see one of the backup goalkeepers, but I do think Jurgen Klopp, given that Alisson's going to be back in the next couple of weeks, will probably just stick with Adrian and just, cross his fingers and hope that nothing goes wrong this time out. Ahead of him, I think it's going to have to be Joe Gomez and Fabinho as the centre-half pairing, and I think it's going to be really interesting how Joe Gomez copes with this. I think the narrative that he's injury prone has maybe been exposed as slightly overblown since Virgil van Dijk's injury. People have actually gone back and looked at the stats, and I think he only missed one game last season and was in one of the top brackets for how many games players have played for lads who are under the age of 23 or at the age of 23. So for a young centre half, his fitness is actually pretty decent, and he's kind of been unlucky with injuries in the past in terms of the fact he's just taken heavy knocks that have put him out for extended period of time. It's not necessarily always been muscle injuries and stuff like that have recurred and caused problems over and over again, maybe in the way that they kind of have for Joel Matip. So Gomez has got an opportunity here to kind of step out of Virgil van Dijk's shadow, because while as Liverpool fans we don't see him as being in Virgil van Dijk's shadow, there's always been this impression, I think, around the general footballing world that Virgil van Dijk is, the senior member of the back line, and he very much shepherds Joe Gomez through difficult moments. But when you look back maybe to a couple of seasons ago, the start of the 2018-19 season, Joe Gomez was actually playing on a level above Virgil van Dijk, I think it's safe to say. Of course, Van Dijk has been more consistent over his Liverpool career, but Gomez is capable of stepping up and taking on the mantle of being a Liverpool centre-half, and sometimes even bailing out someone as good as Virgil van Dijk when Virgil van Dijk is caught out. So at his best, Gomez can be a brilliant centre-half for Liverpool, and of course without Virgil van Dijk, he's kind of got to step up to that level now, and it'll be interesting to see whether he takes on more leadership roles as well. Of course, Van Dijk was in charge of the line. He knew when he would be the one who was vocal, who would tell them when to push up, when to drop, when to tighten up, when to spread out and stuff like that, and hopefully we see that from Joe Gomez, because I think out of the three players, of course, Fabinho doesn't necessarily play in the back line as much. I'm not saying that he's not defensively astute. I think he's actually a very, very solid centre-half. When you look back at the performances he's put in there for Liverpool, he's been very, very good. The most recent one, of course, being against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, where he kept Timo Werner pretty quiet and had an all-round very, very good game. So I'm not saying Fabinho isn't good enough. I'm kind of fine with seeing him start at centre-back in this game against Ajax. Of course, I'd rather Virgil van Dijk, but of course we're not going to get that under the circumstances. But Joe Gomez is more experienced in terms of how Liverpool's back line works, and without Virgil van Dijk there, I think he's going to have to be the one who takes on the mantle of being charged of it. And who knows, this could be the making of him. By the time Virgil van Dijk's back, we could be looking at Joe Gomez as potentially the best centre-half in the team. Like I said, it's not make or break, because of course his Liverpool career is not going to fall apart if it doesn't go well. It's obviously very understandable when his long-term partner is going to be out for an extended period of time that maybe things don't go well, but it's entirely possible that they do go well, and Joe Gomez really, really stakes a claim as Liverpool's best centre-half, and I think that's what all of us want to see. So I think it is going to be Gomez and Fabinho as a centre-half pairing. I think it's going to have to be Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andrew Robertson as the two left-backs. Maybe we see a little bit of rotation in those areas over the next few games. After this, we have got Sheffield United at home, Midtjylland, which I think might be at home as well, and then West Ham at home, so there's room for rotation there. But in the meantime, with a game like this, and of course with the shake-up that's already occurring in the back line, you don't really want to be throwing in too many more bombshells, even though players like Tsimikas are certainly good enough to play in the left-back role for Liverpool. So I think it's Robertson and Trent as your two full-backs. Moving on into the midfield, I think Henderson's going to have to obviously play the deep line role, with Fabinho no longer available in that area because he is going to have to drop into the centre-back role. I think John Henderson is probably the best number 6 that Liverpool have got in that role without Fabinho there. Of course, both of them offer things that are very different, and it would be nice to have a more horses for courses approach available where we can choose whether to play Henderson or Fabinho. But in the meantime, I absolutely trust Henderson in that role. I think Gini Wijnaldum has to play as well in the midfield 3. And then I've put Curtis Jones on my notes, but I'm kind of umming and ahhing between him and James Milner. I think Naby Keita given that he's coming back from an injury, you don't really want to throw him into a game of this magnitude. I'm looking instead at the game against Sheffield United at home on Saturday evening as the game where we can put Naby Keita back in and test his fitness and stuff like that. But for this one, I think it's got to be a straight shootout between Jones and Milner. I think really it comes down to how much you trust the back line and the overall team as well to manage the game. I think if you're a little bit concerned about Ajax getting at us and causing us real problems, then you put James Milner in there for a little bit of extra leadership as well, of course, with Virgil van Dijk being taken out the side. But if we think we've got the beating of Ajax, even with the injuries that we've got in the side, if we think we can dominate the game, dominate the ball more importantly, and keep the ball in their half, then absolutely it's got to be Curtis Jones. And I think it would do the lad the world of good to give him a start in the Champions League. You know, he's played a reasonable amount of Premier League football for Liverpool now. He's played enough domestic cup football to prove that he's good enough for those games. He needs to be playing at a higher level, and maybe Ajax away is a step too far. But Curtis Jones has shown that he's no shrinking violet. He's shown that he backs himself to the hilt. And if you put him in this game, he's not going to be walking around that pitch thinking, well, I feel out of my depth here. He is going to be wanting to take the game by the scruff of the neck to make a name for himself and to really stamp his authority on the match. And that can work against you because he can become a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too front foot, and he can leave spaces there that Henderson and Gini Wijnaldum become overwhelmed by because of the fact that they're kind of abandoned by their third midfield partner. And in that situation, of course, James Milner is the better bet. But personally, I'd rather see Curtis Jones. I think we don't want to start this game in a negative way, and I don't really back this whole idea of Henderson, Gini and Milner being a negative midfield. I know it was used quite a lot a couple seasons ago, and people got quite angry in the end because they felt like it wasn't creative enough, it wasn't attacking enough, it didn't really show much impetus to get forward, and it was more functional than it was kind of, there was no flair to it. I certainly don't think that's the case, but I think a player like Curtis Jones certainly adds more creativity, adds more flair, and adds more kind of impetus to get forward and drive forward with the ball, and also creates a bit more of a link with the front three as well. I think that was one of the other issues with the Henderson, Gini and Milner midfield, was it felt like there was definitely a gap there between where they were and where the front three players were, and you saw, you know, Firmino had to drop or Trent and Robbo had to really bomb forward to accommodate for it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Those players suit those kind of roles. But personally, I'd rather see Curtis Jones in this game. So I'm going to put him down to start, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if James Milner starts instead. And then the front three, I think it's going to be the usual suspects. I think it is going to be Mane, Firmino and Salah. Of course, there is the Firmino question at the moment, which is starting to come to the boil before every game, really, of whether he needs to be dropped out the side. Because, let's face it, his form hasn't been great. I felt like after a good international break where he scored goals and created goals for Brazil, he might actually be able to then play himself back into form in a Liverpool shirt as well, but he never quite looked himself in the derby match once again, and I think maybe we actually looked a little bit better going forward once Diogo Jota came on and Mane moved into that slightly more central role, although of course they interchanged a little bit, and that of course would make us very difficult for Ajax to deal with if they want to play a high line and risk getting done on the counter-attack. Then Jota just creates that element of instability, because you never know who's going to be in the middle, who's going to be on either flank. All of those three can pretty much interchange with one another, so maybe that's something that Jurgen Klopp would be thinking about. But given that it's a big European night, these are moments where Firmino thrives. You look back to probably his best spell in a Liverpool shirt was the 17-18 European campaign, where he hit double figures for goals and bagged plenty of assists as well. You know, in a single semi-final match, he got 2 goals and 2 assists, which is pretty much unheard of. He's one of only 2 players to do that, Mo Salah being the other in the Champions League. So these are the kind of games where you feel like he might actually rediscover his form. You look back to the Atletico game as well, of course, where he gets that big goal. Unfortunately, it's completely nullified by what happens next, but that could have been a real catalyst for him to hit goal-scoring form as well. So if he doesn't perform in this game, then I'm all for bringing in Jota or Minamino for the subsequent games against Sheffield United, Midtjylland and West Ham United. But I think if he's going to have an opportunity to play himself back into form, then this is absolutely perfect for him. So I would like to see him. And listen, if he's not playing well, take him off on an hour. Take him off at half-time if you absolutely have to. But I would personally like to see Firmino start this game, and I think that's what Jurgen Klopp is going to do. So taking a quick look at Ajax then, obviously it's a bit hard to really judge where they are form-wise at the moment, because the Dutch league is very different to the standard of the Premier League. That's not kind of, English league exceptionalism or anything like that. You just have to look at some of the teams that are there and the players that are playing in that league. Ajax have, of course, won 4 games and lost 1 so far this season. That loss, of course, is a bit of an aberration because, of course, you'd expect them to win pretty much every game. They lost to Groningen, which was certainly a surprise result. And maybe they are finding their feet a little bit, of course, after losing Hakim Ziyech over the summer, losing Donny van der Beek as well. I think that maybe this is actually quite a good time to play them, certainly to get this fixture. Looking back earlier on in the season to when we played Chelsea at Stamford Bridge as well, they were a team that were rebuilding, they were integrating a lot of new players. Ajax are kind of doing that as well. They're having to find a balance once again, having lost key players and having to bring new players in, both in the transfer market and through the youth setup as well. I think they're still finding their way by the sounds of it. So this is probably the best time to get this fixture playing away at the Amsterdam Arena, because if we got this as the last game of the group stage campaign, then maybe they'd be on slightly more solid ground. Of course, Liverpool are in a similar situation where we're having to change the side up a little bit because of injuries, which is not ideal. So we are, of course, not perfectly established as a side, but I think maybe maturity comes through here. You look back at the Ajax team of a couple seasons ago and you think about how good they were in the Champions League, making it all the way to the semi-finals, and it looked for all the world like they were going to make the final, and you feel like that would have definitely been a difficult game, certainly a different game to the one we had against Tottenham Hotspur. I think Ajax would have ran us a little bit closer and challenged us a little bit more. I still think we would have won, but I think it would have been definitely a bit more competitive than the match that ended up playing out against Tottenham Hotspur. But since then, most of the players from that side have gone. You look at De Ligt, who was an absolute linchpin in the defence. He has now left the side. Like I said, Ziyech and Donny van der Beek. Frenkie de Jong, of course, went to Barcelona as well. So they're a side that seem constantly in transition. So it's kind of difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen. But we do know how they play. We know that they like to play with the ball. They're a possession side. They're quite high intensity as well. They're pretty similar to Liverpool in a lot of ways. And they also play a high line as well. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with that, because you sometimes see in European matches teams that come from nations where the standard of the league isn't as high, but they are the best team in that league, struggle to adapt their playing style for Champions League matches because they are used to being on the front foot, having a lot of the ball, being a possession side, playing a high line. I'm looking back to maybe like the Maribor games of a couple seasons ago where we absolutely ripped them to bits 7-0 in their own backyard because they just didn't know how to deal with a team like Liverpool, because it doesn't happen to them very often. I'm not saying we're going to rip Ajax to bits 7-0. I think it's going to be a much closer game because the standard of the Dutch league is definitely higher than the Slovenian league that Maribor are in. But it's very interesting to see what they do tactically. Do they stick to their guns and play the way they normally play in the league with the high line as well? You feel like with the players Liverpool have got that can get in behind, that is absolute suicide. We've seen people in Europe try and play high lines against Liverpool before, Roma being a notable example in the semi-final, and they just got shredded beyond belief. It was like, every 5 minutes Liverpool were having a goal scoring chance, a clear goal scoring chance. They were one-on-one with the goalie, or they'd got their way round the defensive traps and they were creating tap-in chances and stuff like that. So I do think Ajax are going to have to reassess the way they play for this game, and they have, of course, done that. They've changed the way they play for European competition a couple seasons ago, and it worked absolutely perfect for them. They found a balance between their signature style and a horses for courses approach that really, really worked. And of course, while the personnel is different, the backroom staff is generally the same from that European run. So Liverpool have got to be wary. It's not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, it's going to be the toughest game of the group stage campaign. But as I said, that might end up working in our favour, because if we get a result here, then that, I hesitate to say, turns our season around, because I don't want to say that our season is a complete mess. I think this idea that it's all falling apart around us just because we dropped a few points in the Premier League and Virgil van Dijk has been injured is ridiculous. It's a long old season. Plenty can happen. And with the way it's set up at the moment, with the congested calendar and the pandemic and stuff like that, things happen very, very quickly as well. Football, everyone's always had short memories in football. It's very much a last result kind of sport. But that has become even more so now because of the speed that everything's moving at. So if Liverpool can get a positive result against Ajax, then suddenly the narrative changes. You look at this European campaign, you think we can make the knockout stages, and then we are, very, very close to getting silverware once again. You look at the Premier League and think, well, if we can beat Ajax, then we can beat Sheffield United and West Ham, etc., etc., etc. It really feels like the club needs a boost at the moment, and when it does need a boost, when it's up against it, when the chips are down, Liverpool tend to turn things around and get back on the right track under Jurgen Klopp, and I've been backing them to do the same in this game. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think Liverpool are going to come away with the win. I do think both teams are going to score, but I reckon it'll probably be 3-1 to the Reds if I had to put money down on it. Let me know what you think is going to be the scoreline down in the comments below. Apart from that, that is all for today's video. So thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, as always, you guys know what to do. Hit the like button down there. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out the other videos that have been out on the channel in the past. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back again with another video very soon. Until then, bye for now.